The UN's goal seems to be nothing but attack the only Jewish state, to attack the state of Israel. And you might think I'm exaggerating. You might think you focus on anti-Semitism too much. You call everything anti-Semitism. But the fact that the upcoming conference is probably just going to be about Israel, and the biggest story is the fact that the Palestinian state is getting recognized, should tell you something. I've also recently seen that apparently a report from the UN came out that said that nobody reads the UN reports. Apparently, 1 in 5 UN reports gets less than 1,000 downloads. And even when it comes to the top 5% of UN reports, they get about 5,000 downloads each. Not to mention, most of them, again, are against Israel. So today we'll discuss some of the recent things that came out of the UN. We'll discuss a little bit also the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and what UN is actually being used for, I think, more than anything. Welcome to today's episode of The Reality Show. Joining me today are Anders Ingemarsson and Marco and Richard. Thank you guys for joining me today. And let me jump to you, Marco. Any opening thoughts about maybe broadly the UN as it exists right now?
Yes, I mean, when we talk about the UN, we should bear in mind that it's not a unity of nations. They're not, most of them are actually illegitimate nations. They are either, supporting of terrorists, or they are theocracies, or they are, dictatorships. And most of them are just laughable. To call some of these countries and states is just laughable. But they seem to be united by the desire actually to bring down Israel. They disproportionately discuss Israeli and Gaza relationship and Palestinian relationship. They've been creating institutions that are just designed to support the Palestinian cause. UNRWA is one of them, who's supposed to provide relief, United Nations Relief Work Agency for the Palestinians and Near East. I mean, even the name itself, they got the Palestinian thing. And there's another one now, whose name now escapes me. It's just designed to promote Palestinian culture, which doesn't exist. Palestinians is not an ethnicity, is not a nation. It's never been in history. So really, there's no culture to support there. And bearing in mind the UN, the Security Council is also made up by China and Russia. I mean, Russia is currently engaging in a war of attacking another state, is invading another state currently. But yeah, we focus on Israel because focusing on, for example, the genocide that actually Russia is committing according to the UN own definition, Russia is actually removing children from Ukraine. So that's one of the 5 criteria to define a genocide, but we don't focus on that. We don't focus on the genocide that China, again, a member of the Security Council with a veto, has been doing on the Uyghur, the Muslim Uyghur. They're not Muslim enough, if China is involved. And of course, they as far as I can tell, they haven't pronounced themselves on the existence of Pakistani rape gang here in Britain, for example. That for decades have been grooming and attacking white vulnerable girls, vulnerable girls, because that's the culture. So I don't remember Gutierrez ever saying anything about it. But when it comes to Israel, whatever they do is wrong. Provide support to your enemy is wrong. Avoid hitting the civilian population is wrong. So, whatever.
Yeah, the United
Well,
Nations. Sorry.
no, I think today or yesterday it was Indigenous Day, so I think Antonio Guterres, when I checked Antonio Guterres' post, that's what he was talking about. But of course, we're not talking about the indigenous Jewish people in the region. We're of course only talking about the people whose culture is actually not good enough to create a civilized society. That's who we talk about when we talk about the indigenous.
Yeah, it's always the thing I forget to do at the start of the day is check what stupid day of the day it is. But yeah, I mean, the UN is a pointless organization, isn't it? It's illegitimate. It's invalid at conceptual level, invalid right at root, really, because all it does is it put a restraint on the good and gives the evil countries a louder voice with which to bark. And I think all in the interest of equality, to pretend that one country is like another simply because it's on the list of countries in the world, and therefore we shouldn't treat any other aspect of it as relevant when judging how a vote is done. So of course, evil spreads by manipulating other countries within their UN votes and all that kind of thing. So it's an illegitimate organization that we shouldn't trust. And of course, people don't actually trust it. I mean, there's a reason people don't read the reports. And there's a reason that they get hardly any downloads. And that's because it's the headline and the logo that is the only thing that counts. And of course, that is repeated endlessly by lazy media across the world. And that's used to give a legitimacy that is not merited to any statement that is made. And it gives them an expert to call upon, where the expert's credentials and connections and agenda doesn't need to be laid out clearly, because they're hidden under the banner of the UN, which blurs everything into one fog that simply leaves you with a headline and a logo and a trust this as true, which it so frequently is not. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is an example of that. I mean, the idea at the moment that you've got individual children being counted in terms of a starvation, it's not numbers of there's not like tens of thousands, and you're summarizing the number with a single shorter number. You're supposedly able to count single elements of starvation, and of course we know that lots of those instances are based on kids or different families with different pre-existing medical conditions. But supposedly you can produce a report or an announcement or a tweet with UN backing virtually every single day, just with another number implying that it's mushrooming out of control, when only looking at the actual data, the facts on the ground, the reality exposes the fact that it's a lie at root.
Anders, any opening thoughts about the UN?
Well, yes. From a U.S. perspective, it's long overdue that the U.S. should leave the UN. We are massively propping up that organization with our dollars. I think the US is by far the single largest contributor. I don't remember the exact percentage that we contribute. And the fact that we have their headquarters in the, at least on paper, capitalist capital of the world, New York City. It's an affront in the first place. Obviously, there is a benefit as part of a country's foreign policy to have having interactions and relations with other countries, but UN is not filling that role. Looked at it from a perspective of rational self-interest of individual Americans. We're basically paying for our enemies in many cases, as Marco and Richard reiterated. We have most of the countries, or a lot of the countries, are rogue countries, and those who are quote unquote civilized, they're still acting against the US interest. So we now have a president who prides himself of taking bold actions in different areas, mostly for bad, occasionally for good. But this is an area where he could do some real permanent good by defunding the UN. And if we think that we would want to give them some time to shut down in an organized fashion, we can just lower the budget with a certain amount every year and let it take 5 years or something. And then, quite frankly, I think they should start to look for a different headquarters as well, because the whole organization is fraudulent and anti-American, anti-Israel, obviously. So it has, if it ever served a purpose, it has outserved it by now. Now, there are certain individual organizations that I'm sure within the UN, under the UN umbrella, that are worthwhile supporting. But again, from a US perspective, let individual Americans vote with their own dollars, not through tax dollars of what they want to support. And we will see which organizations that survive that.
Yeah, I mean, there are organizations within the UN, let's say, I don't know, maybe something like UNESCO or I think also UNICEF is the one I'm thinking of, where you could say there are sort of a bit better. And my question is, why does it have to be in the UN? Why do we need to coordinate with dictatorships about something like heritage sites, about something like, again, refugees, which, again, I think is like a reasonable thing to have an organization about. But when it comes to the UN, it corrupts everything, right? Because because every country has a say to some to some extent. When you have, for example, the UN Human Rights Council, right? It's not just countries picked or people picked on any sort of merit. It's every country gets a representative. It rotates. It is based on the region. So I think specifically with the UN Human Rights Council, basically every region, like Europe, America, Africa, Asia Pacific, they all get certain amount of seats that basically rotate. So you have oftentimes a bunch of dictatorships there, right? This is what happens. And same at the UN, especially with the Security Council, right? You have an organization that has embedded originally Soviet Union, which depending on how you want to take it, is even worse than current Russia, and then communist China. These are the two nations that basically have a say in the one thing where the UN could actually do something about, like the peacekeeping forces. But we've seen even when peacekeeping forces do something, right? When they were on the border between Israel and Egypt, I think before Sinai War, and when they were in the south of Lebanon, they didn't do anything. Again, because they are compromised, because a bunch of the forces are part of these dictatorships that do not support Israel, that do not even agree with the mission that is happening. Simply because you make it doesn't necessarily mean that it actually will happen. So let's go stay a little bit more on the Antonio Guterres. Again, I checked out his X recently, and he had this post there. Gaza is and must remain an integral part of the Palestinian state. Marco, am I wrong? But wasn't there a sort of a civil war and somebody else took over Gaza, this integral part of the Palestinian state?
Listen, I mean, whatever he says, just ignore it. I mean, the guy is the head of an organization which has really never done anything good for humankind. In fact, I really think we don't need an organization like the UN. If a state wants to deal with another state on trading basis, they're perfectly able to carry on without the UN as an intermediary. The UN forces us in a very collectivist way, first of all, to interact and deal with countries that A, they're not in our interest to talk to, and B, they are a literal drain on our resources. So being forced to be in this big bureaucratic nightmare and molasses that the UN and its institutions are, is just effectively a ball and chain to freedom and individual rights. The whole organization is not there to foster freedom of the individual. It's not there to promote thriving, progress, and stuff like that. No, they're there in order to allow the lowest common denominator, i.e., the terrorist and the dictator, to exist and thrive in their own environments. And frankly, we see now often countries which should actually be pariah states are involved actively as a vote or as a membership of some stupid committee. and how the agenda, the anti-Semitic agenda, has been spreading like wildfire across the UN itself. It kind of tells you how disproportionate that this little state in the Middle East, the little democratic state, the only one in the Middle East, is treated and treated like I don't know, like the plague, but by every single institution and members of the United States. Tells you that there's something afoot there. There's something more than just politics. There's an innate, well, innate. It's a chosen sets of policies which are designed effectively to the destruction of Israel itself, ignoring the fact that that very institution created the state of Israel and the Palestinian state, which has never been accepted by the people who were supposed to live in the Palestinian state, and those Arabs, which could have by now lived in peace in cohabitation with the Israeli state, chose to attack Israel at any juncture. So for 80 years, they've been attacking the idea of the existence of Israeli state or Jewish state because it's a Jewish state, because there are Jewish involved. And these people are massive racists. They do not want Jews anywhere on the planet.
I mean, to say Gaza is an integral part of the Palestinian state, you've got to ask at this point, what Palestinian state? What Palestinians? Well, what do you mean? Because again, the fact they are associate members of the UN or whatever the term is in UN speak is again a piece of politicking, isn't it? It's not based on reality. It's not based on fact. It's just based on trying to manipulate other countries, isn't it? I mean, I'm often on this show talking about how much I hate polls and surveys. But one of the things that surveys bring out, and one of the reasons I dislike them, is the fact that when you ask a particular question, you get a different answer, and if you phrase it a different way, you get, a contradictory answer. But when people have a positive response to things like the UN and the EU when it comes to surveys, when asked about it. And a big part of that is the indoctrination that's carried out from quite a young age. For example, at primary schools in the UK, they have United Nations days for like 6, 7-year-olds in class, where each member of the class represents a different country. And of course, nobody wants to be Israel because they'd be ostracized by the rest of the class because, that anti-Semitism.
Well, that would be on point. That would be educational.
It would be representative of how it works in the UN, but of course it's also embedding that anti-Semitism in ridiculously early, isn't it? On a ridiculous basis. But so people have this built, educated, manipulated, propaganda-based positivity towards the UN, except if you ask same kind of questions in a different survey about do you think a country should control its own borders, define its own laws, determine what happens within its own territory, set up its own constitution, define how it operates, how it's governed, what rights the people, how those rights within that country are going to be represented. People all over the place opt for that. Which runs against what the UN and these wider supranational bodies try and do, which is some sort of global government which bypasses whatever decisions people make at the ballot box in terms of who they elect and which parties they choose to go for, make that irrelevant, even more irrelevant than it is anyway, frankly, and try and bypass it, and therefore have things decided by committee, and that committee is a very select committee. It makes it look like it's the whole globe deciding evenly, but it's actually a very limited number of people, and of course completely removed from the democratic process, who are deciding and then producing these reports, which lead to the newspaper headlines, which give it a credence it doesn't deserve.
Yeah, I always say my sort of like biggest problems with international organizations that are supposed to be sort of like political, meaning beholden to the people, is the fact that they almost cannot be. I always use the example of the EU Parliament because whenever I watch Slovak politics and I see some politician and then I don't see him for like 4 years, I realize, oh, he probably went to the EU Parliament. So I never hear from him again because you never hear from those people. For some reason, either the EU sort of coverage like sucks so much that they simply cannot get any, like, I have no idea what's going, like, if you ask me what was like a single piece of legislation that came out of the EU, I have no idea because nobody talks about it. For some reason, things happen there and we never hear from them. And EU is relatively closed and close organization. Now take the UN and ask somebody to produce like one thing the UN ever did, and there is nothing because again, there are things happening there that people have no idea about. And I mean, I brought up the sort of how many people read the UN report, right? It's for vast majority of them, it's around like the average is few thousands download. There's probably more people in the UN itself that should probably read those, and even that is not getting it. So again, when it comes to things that are coming out of the UN, again, we really struggle to see how people are there, and when something bad happens, what is the responsibility or sort of what is the consequences, right? We've I haven't checked it recently, but we've covered Karim Khan, the one of the chief prosecutors for the International Criminal Court, and one of the scandals that he had is the fact that he, and now I haven't checked it recently, but he was accused of sexual misconduct. Now, let's say this indeed did happen. Will he not be employed ever again? Or will he get some different kind of UN position or some different kind of position in some different organization? Because again, when you have so many of them, what is the responsibility? How do you ensure that sort of right things happen? We have a super chat from Paul Zeus. Thank you so much. He says the UN and FIFA have a cooperative relationship and both are corrupt. Well, I don't watch FIFA closely, but I think we did some episodes about that in the past, so maybe you can check that out. Richard, do you want to jump in? You seemed a little bit.
Oh no, I'm just picturing every time somebody mentions FIFA, I do picture that moment when somebody threw a load of fake dollars all over the head of FIFA to emphasize the corruption element of it, and that's a visual image I associate with it, which probably caused me to smirk there. But yes.
We have a super chat from Faye. Thank you so much. He says, after the US stops going along with this farce, they can just go ahead and rename it United Nations against Israel. Yeah, I'm sure that. Well, no, they cannot because then it would be obvious. I mean, I think Marco, I wrote it down earlier, said it's a disproportionate discussion of Israel. Well, disproportionate is a relative term. Disproportionate to what? If your goal is to simplify Israel on every occasion, then it's not disproportionate. It's about proportionate. But yeah, when we talk about the population or even the amount of supposed war crimes that are happening, because I think even if you give all the war crimes that Israel is supposedly doing, I think it still would be disproportionate coverage if you compare it to what's happening in the rest of the world. And we also have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. I want to go into what's happening in Gaza, specifically with the UN or the role UN is supposed to be playing. But first, Anders, any more thoughts on what we've said about Antonio Guterres?
Well, yeah, I think we shouldn't really pay too much attention to what he's saying. He's representing an immoral organization. So I just looked up what Ayn Rand had to say about the United Nations, and United Nations, and she had quite a lot. But here's from her Playboy interview in 1964. So that is 61 years ago. Quote, yes, I do not sanction the grotesque pretense of an organization allegedly devoted to world peace and human rights, which includes Soviet Russia, the worst aggressor and bloodiest butcher in history, as one of its members. The notion of protecting rights with Soviet Russia among the protectors is an insult to the concept of rights and to the intelligence of any man who is asked to endorse or sanction such an organization. I do not believe that an individual should cooperate with criminals, and for all the same reasons, I do not believe that free countries should cooperate with dictatorships. End quote. So Soviet Russia was, the prime evil empire back in 64. Russia still in there, still in the UN, still on the Security Council as a permanent member. And And so, yeah, the fact that we remain, we, and I include the United States and the UK and others, mostly free countries still, that we're even participating in this is a sanction of evil, of a moral sanction of all these dictatorships around the world who are continuously and consistently violating individual rights on a scale that is unfathomable.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into sort of some of the things that are happening on the ground. So when it comes to the Gaza operation, one thing Israel says needs to happen is, of course, the delivery of the humanitarian aid. Now, when it comes to this actually happening, one of the things Israel says it needs is cooperation of the UN. Specifically, sort of many of those trucks that are going in are of the UN, and some of the facilitation when it comes to the aid deliveries is also supposed to be by the UN. Of course, the only as far as I understand, the only way Israel is currently giving out aid directly is through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has several sites, but is not enough to cover all of it. Now, when it comes to actually cooperation or even delivery, I think a report I've seen recently from the UN is that in the last past weeks, about 3.1 thousand trucks went into Gaza, and about 200 of them actually got where they were supposed to be. And I wish I'll try to find a picture because even the picture was funny. But it said when it comes to the number of them that were actually delivered, it said something like, well, some of them were taken over by starving civilians or by armed groups, and this was like an official like UN thing. And yeah, and let's start with this. I mean, Marco, when it comes to, again, I don't like even to give in premise that Israel should give any aid to its enemies, but what do you do when supposedly UN that is supposed to help with this is losing all of it or is allowing it to get lost?
Well, the UN is not losing anything. The UN is the very body that created and funded UNRWA, which was the organization that was aiding the Hamas on the ground by building schools, building facilities, and letting effectively leasing them for free to Hamas, where they often hide weapons and all this kind of stuff. And frankly, as you said, let's ignore the fact that Israel should not provide a single ounce of relief or any kind to the Palestinians, specifically in Gaza, because they started a war. If they want to go back to a point where they can eat and have a functioning market, well, then surrender, return the hostages, which are still held by them. You know, the very innocent people we're supposed to care about. They're still holding 50 hostages. Probably only 20 of them are still alive. So if you're really worried about your own security, your safety, your comfort, just give up Hamas, give up the ideas of destroying Israel. But also the UN, you know, the business of humanitarian aid is a multi-billion business. The UN hasn't got any interest whatsoever in seeing Israel and the US in the new organization to succeed, to actually provide food and to the Gazans, because if they succeed, if Israel and the United States with the new institution are able to provide aid, it will make the UN and its institutions irrelevant. And there's nothing worse for this kind of parasites, these vampire squids, to be made irrelevant. They need people to need them. First of all, why is it Israel that's provide aid to the Palestinians, not the way around? It's just we're going back to from each to their abilities. I mean, according to their abilities, it's just ridiculous. We've seen that Israel has provided lots and lots and lots of tons of food to be distributed to the Palestinians, but the UN chooses to boycott this enterprise, they cannot possibly be seen to be irrelevant, because if they were seen to be irrelevant, then the population of Gaza itself would be less hostile towards Israel. If the UN doesn't provide the food and the weapons to Hamas, then the population on Gaza itself will not declare allegiance to the UN and Hamas anymore. So they had to see this fail. Uh, you know, the fact that this enterprise exists, this providing food to your enemy, is even there. It's just rotten itself. But having to provide this kind of support to the UN by bypassing the activity is just ridiculous.
And as mentioned there, the humanitarian and Ayn Rand quoting it in relation to the UN, and she was very clear about being beware of the humanitarian. And one of the best ways of grasping the point is to read the novel The Fountainhead. And the many ways in which she reveals not only the psychology, but the mechanisms and the ways in which humanitarianism is used as a cover for evil and is actually, in many ways, the evil itself. So I think if you really want to understand that, and it's a brilliant novel anyway, everybody should read The Fountainhead, and you'll see exactly what I mean. But to return to what Marco was saying there, I mean, yes, the UN is its purpose, its essence, its raison d'etre is essentially to perpetuate its need to exist constantly. That's all it's aimed, all its primary aim is. And that is to perpetuate the suffering wherever it finds it in order to be the answer to that suffering. Therefore, it doesn't want any suffering to end so that it can move on and extract and say, okay, that problem solved. We're done now. That country can manage on its own. None of that ever happens. It is only the proliferation, the expansion of these kind of organizations that you see. They only ever want more money, more resources, more people, more influence, more control, and more oppression of the individual's lives across the planet. As they're expected to hand over more control of their lives to these big organizations.
Yeah, when it comes to sort of the purpose of the UN, I just looked up and I think I remember I'm probably one of the few people who actually read the UN Charter, but I remember this from the Article 1, but I looked it up specifically, the words. It says to maintain, when it comes to the goal of the UN, to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of the peoples, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. And my question would be, when was that ever achieved? What was the war that was stopped by the UN? What was the sort of cooperation that was brought in by the UN? Ukraine war happened, the conflicts in the Middle East are happening. When it comes to when the UN was organized, again, even just when it comes to Israel, we can ignore the original UN partition. UN was just created. Maybe they didn't have sort of the effectiveness to actually do something. Although that was probably the only time when actually most of the UN was relatively free nations. So if they were not even able to do it back then, there is a question if there will ever be. Again, they had the UN peacekeeping forces in Egypt. They didn't stop the Sinai War. They simply got out when Egypt asked them. They didn't stop Hezbollah from acting. Again, is it UNIFIL was in the south of Lebanon for 2 decades, and they didn't do anything. As soon as Hezbollah had a chance, they just started attacking, and they didn't care. And then Israel was blamed because apparently some UNIFIL forces were killed in the crossfire. You cannot make this up. Like, you had forces that were supposed to stop this terrorist organization. They were not able to do so, and then they blamed Israel for actually doing their job. So again, I mean, Anders, question for you, I mean, I'll bring up one more thing. When it comes to sort of the operation now, as we've said, UN is currently boycotting. sort of parts of it. One of the Israel officials says the UN has already declined to facilitate aid deliveries in recent months, citing alleged war crimes in the establishment of food distribution centers in Khan Yunis. And basically, the official UN position is that Gaza Humanitarian Foundation should be gone. This shouldn't be done by an Israeli state. You shouldn't have any weapons when it comes to these aid sites, which, as far as I understand, is ridiculous. Both in Burkina Faso and Sudan, apparently that was a practice that you had the aid distribution sites where you had sort of people with weapons to basically make sure it is done in orderly fashion and make sure it is done safely. But I mean, Anders, what is this kind of like just imagine the scenario, right? We know Hamas is stealing the aid. Israel tries to do something to prevent the stealing of aid. Israel has probably done more when it comes to lowering Gaza prices in Gaza when it comes to certain products than anybody ever by getting rid of Hamas and by stopping the stealing of aid. But the UN says no, you should let it get stolen.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's really sad in the sense that Israel is digging itself deeper and deeper into this hole, backing itself into this corner, and the reason for that is that Israel, largely accept the same morality that UN and Hamas is operating under, and that is an altruist morality, and that is weakening Israel. As we say, just providing humanitarian aid to your enemy, it's just, I mean, it's objectively ridiculous. I saw somewhere, and I think we may have discussed it here, that this humanitarian operation is the biggest in human history since the Berlin airlift in the 1960s when Russia shut off access to West Berlin. Now, the difference is that in this case, Israel is aiding its enemy. We were supporting our friends. We, the West, the US, were supporting our friends in West Berlin. So it's, I mean, you can't come up with a worse story than this. It's unimaginable that we're even discussing this, and the fact that Israel is a victim of its own subscription to this morality is what has prolonged this conflict. We're almost 2 years in now, right? Hamas started it. Hamas is responsible for all of this, but we also know that Hamas is benefiting from the suffering of the Gaza population, and they want the Gaza population to suffer. And then, of course, they're stealing this aid because that is probably right now their main way of financing their operations. And then they resell it to their own, to the inhabitants in Gaza. So that's how they finance their operation right now. And then, another part of this captivity to altruism is the focus on the hostages. So we have 50, 60 hostages left, dead or alive. And the fact that Israel, and yes, it's really sad, and I feel for the families, but this obsession with bringing home these last 2-3 dozen of hostages is totally irrational. From a nation's point of view. I mean, how many more IDF soldiers will be killed and maimed? How many more civilians will be killed and maimed in this and future conflicts? Because there will be future conflicts if Israel cannot take care of business here. Because of these last 56 hostages, or 50 to 60 hostages. And I mean, it's really, really sad. It's heartbreaking to see that Israel cannot break out of this altruist morality that they subscribe to. And for as long as they don't do that, they will muddle along here. And I'm afraid that things will get worse before they get better.
Yeah, and something I wanted to comment on. When it comes to sort of the obsession with the hostages, one thing I've seen is when it came to Netanyahu's press conference, when he talked about the hostages, he said, most importantly, something like it's important to bring the 20 or so alive hostages home. And he was slammed for it by basically the sort of the anti-Netanyahu protesters or the sort of the bring them home crowds for basically forgetting about the bodies or for not mentioning the bodies. And again, like we said, we feel for it. But when it comes to the again, even when it comes to the families themselves, those are understandable. And many of the families are actually on the side of this war. They're saying basically go fully in. This is the best way to actually bring back the hostages. I think the point Alex made when I was on episode with her is remember who is the people who are the hostages actually on camera. Hamas knows that the best people to put on is the people who are calling for a ceasefire. They don't put on the hostages that of the families that are calling for the IDF to go fully in. They are using specifically. This is straight up propaganda that we or sort of people, some people in Israel are unfortunately falling for. Now is one again. Israel didn't have to wait for this so-called opportunity, and I'm using the air quotes for people on the podcast, because it had every right to go in. Well, one, to not get out of Gaza, and every right to go into Gaza as soon as the first rocket came in, or relatively speaking, as soon as Hamas came into power by a violent coup, because that was already the first sign of what's to happen. We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. She says, is it true that Al-Mawasi is one of two areas where Hamas is active? The other is Gaza. I thought that Israel wants where Israel wants Gazans to go to be safe. If that's what is that one of the regions inside of Gaza? Yeah, I mean, Hamas is active anywhere IDF isn't. That's the fact. I mean, Hamas is the governing party or sort of the governor of Gaza, and will obviously be present whenever or wherever IDF is not. And even where IDF is present, right, with the amounts of with the network tunnels, it's probably going to take a long time until all of them are fully cleared and all of them are fully shut down. So. Yeah, when it comes to sort of moving Palestinians around, I mean, that is the policy that Israel has been taking. Again, unfortunately, because it allows Hamas to also move around. But the goal of Israel is to, again, prevent civilian casualties. But as long as you do not fully occupy the whole thing, you cannot start the full occupation process, hopefully leading over decades to some more peaceful solution. We had a few more topics prepared. I'll just bring up one that I've seen going around, and it's of Zakaria Zubeidi. I think I sent this to you guys, who had an interview with the New York Times. He's I was about to say former terrorist, but that's a weird way to say. He's somebody who was in Israeli prison. Then I believe at some point he escaped. Then he was caught again, and I think he was originally he was released. I think during the Gilad Shalit deal, he was one of those. And he basically commented on saying that he thinks armed resistance against Israel is not working. Now, he was being very nihilistic about it. He said, we tried to talk to Israel, we tried to arm resistance against Israel, and none of it is happening. Marco, any comments on it? I mean, the question that comes to mind is, where is this time where Israel was, or Palestinians were conciliatory towards the Israeli state? But, who am I to say?
Yeah, my main question is why on earth is the New York Times interviewing terrorists? I mean, this guy, until February, I think he was in an Israeli cell for being a terrorist. I mean, am I supposed to listen to anything that people say? Again, if there are Palestinians, whether they are terrorists or whatever, we allow them the same kind of way that we should allow to somebody that talks about how much the hostages are held by Hamas are being actually mistreated by Hamas and the Gazans. And all the people that say, oh, it's just a Palestinian, not Hamas. Well, Hamas, as you mentioned, is the government of Gaza. So the rubbish collectors, the banking system, the people who provide healthcare, they're all Hamas. So the whole thing is so embedded that the IDF will find it very hard actually to separate the civilians from the terrorists, because frankly the terrorists are nowhere in uniform. Every civilian is a potential terrorist, and most of them actually are terrorists. And yes, there might be somebody that be disgruntled with Hamas, but do you see them handing over information to the IDF about where the hostages are held? No. So, yes, these people can talk and talk a very good talk. But on the other hand, do they ever take any action that shows that they are either regretting being terrorists or regretting what they've done on October the 7th? I mean, why should we care about their children? Their children are suffering because they themselves, their parents and guardians and relatives, have done what they've done on October the 7th. If they didn't attack Israel, if they weren't holding hostages right now, they wouldn't be suffering. Their children would be perfectly happy and receiving food from all over the world. But no, they don't go down this route. Why? Well, because their actions speak much loudly than any interview any of these parasites and terrorists can ever do.
This is a guy involved in the second Intifada, right? I believe, and the art I hadn't heard of him specifically, and I don't think his specific name is of relevance, and I don't think we should particularly dwell on the names of these terrorists and give them airtime they don't deserve, frankly, because otherwise I think that's going down the wrong road, frankly. But anyway, we've raised him, and I think the one of the things that was mentioned in the interview was that after giving up on armed resistance, he started broke into and started some kind of a theatre to do sort of cultural stuff to try and resist culturally, which I think means make anti-Israel propaganda on stage. As far as I could read between the lines of what those word salad means within that article. And he seemed to be disillusioned with that as well. But to conflate the idea that he's nihilistic and depressed and is defeated, in terms of enthusiasm, is not the same as him renouncing the ideology, surrendering, giving up on the anti-Israel stance, encouraging others to do so. No, he's just saying what I've been doing hasn't worked in the way I wanted it to. I wish it had. Maybe there's some other way we can destroy Israel. That's the gist of what he's saying. And yet, are we supposed to interpret this as if this is an example of the war being won by Israel and therefore they should stop because people like this have said, "Oh, we've come to the end of the road. We've tried everything and nothing works." Because that's just to fall into a stupid conflation that really misses the point.
Yeah, and I think even when he was asked about Israel again, I think what he said is there is no peaceful solution and there is no military solution. Why? Because the Israelis don't give us anything. It's impossible to uproot us from here, and we don't have any tools to uproot them. So again, this is not. This is him saying he still considers Israel an evil state. He still wants to get rid of it. He simply doesn't know how. When it comes to Palestinians being impossible to uproot, they are not. It can be done, and it should be done. We have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. Anders, any comments on? I should mention he. I don't think he's just a random guy. He's a leader of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in Jenin. So I think Jenin is one of the areas one of the areas that pretty much Palestinian Authority has very little control over and has been experiencing a lot of terrorism. Basically, IDF is almost constantly has to go there because nobody seems to really uphold any sort of security there. Anders?
Yeah, so the fact that now I haven't read the New York Times article, but the fact that the New York Times is profiling this guy and taking him seriously is just another nail in the coffin for that publication. You know, we know that the New York Times, under a thin veneer of alleged objectivity, is definitely skewing Palestinian against Israel. And it was kind of funny to see that this Zubeidi, he has begun a PhD in Israel studies at some kind of university, Birzeit, I don't know where that is. But yeah, no, I mean, he obviously, as I think Richard say, he hasn't changed his views or anything. He just trying to find another way. So now instead of being on the barricades himself and killing Israelis. I guess he is. I mean, he's 49 years old, so he's probably getting up there a little bit. So now he's going to educate the next generation instead. That would be my conclusion.
Yeah, and yeah, Jesus Christ, you didn't have to say that. Now I'm really sad about the future generations. But with that, Marco, we had a few more topics prepared, but we didn't get to them. So, Marco, any last thoughts either about what we talked about, or if you'd like to bring up something from what we've said?
Well, no, just to mention that the UN fights the pro-Palestinian war using reports. Okay, nobody reads them, but they keep generating them, and the rest of the propaganda, pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas propaganda, uses them as a corroboration of their agenda. So, you know, these people self-reference each other all the time, giving it a veneer of credibility. You know, that's how you create propaganda in the first place. But the point is that there are other reports out there. For example, today I think the Israeli state is providing a report to the Red Cross about the mistreatment of the hostages left in Gaza, held by the Gazans, showing how badly they're treated. I mean, we also seen the propaganda picture that Hamas put out about some of them. We also seen the sad scenes that the Hamas rats do every time there was an exchange in the previous month of hostages for terrorists. We see what kind of behavior these rats follow. So, you know, it's up to you to believe whether the credibility of the UN trumps the facts that are in front of your face. But of course, you know, everybody who roots for the uncivilized ones, everybody who wants the caliphate to take over civilized society, will not look at these pictures. And if they see them, they will dismiss them. Because suddenly, you know, the humanity they appeal to, it doesn't matter when the Jews and civilized people are involved.
I think I would just add that we often hear about proxies in terms of Iran for things like Hezbollah or the Houthis. But essentially, the UN is a proxy for many of these evil regimes across the world. And the Russia China axis and all the countries that wish to act as disruptors, the UN is a paradise for the disruptor of the West, because it gives them that veneer that Marco mentioned there, that false credibility, which puts it one step away from who's initiating the disruption, and therefore hides their identity that bit more from the unthinking, the unfocused, the passive individuals that populate so much of our planet and paid so little attention other than to the shiny words of the United Nations as they're taught from a young age at school.
And where can people find you?
Please check out the Briefly Objective sister channel to this. Descriptions in the link below for short form materials, and we've done a few videos on the UN which get to the heart of the matter, so you can always check those out as well in a few minutes and add them to your social media. Forward them on.
Anders, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
Yeah, to end on a positive note, I will be a speaker at the Irreplaceable Spark Conference in Orange County, California, last weekend in October. This is put on by the Ayn Rand Center UK, and I would love to meet everybody who is tuning in.
And with that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching. We have the ARCUK book club today, so in 90 minutes, 1.5 hour. If you are a member on the website page, then you'll be able to. You're part of our WhatsApp groups, and you should have also received an email. And of course, if you are a YouTube member, you'll be able to see the live stream. And there's time still to become both of those. So ARCUK book club in 90 minutes. And we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, bye bye.